Okay, Grandpa. Episode 5 of the podcast. How you feeling today?
Pretty good.
Good?
Slept well.
Good. We have a question from Gloria. It's a simple one. She wanted to know what year your family moved from Marcola to Eugene. And she wants to know if it was in the middle of the school year.
It's the other way around.
Oh, okay.
It was from Eugene to Marcola. It would have been my,
To Marcola from Eugene. Yeah, that's right.
and it would have been my sophomore year, which would have been 52.
1952. And you stayed at, whose house were you at?
I stayed at Mrs. Biggs
Mrs. Biggs. What a nice lady.
and her challenged son by the name of Max.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I was there through high school.
Cool. I'm getting more questions from your brothers and sisters right now.
Oh, I'll bet.
But they're a little hard to get a hold of.
Yeah.
But all right, so we're gonna do some speed questions. Now you don't have to answer them quickly, but just off the top of your head is the answer that I want.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No premeditated. Who's a person that's influenced you in your life the most? Outside of Jesus, outside of historical figures that may be dead.
Yeah.
And when you real life, when you met that was alive.
Would be one of my professors in college, and right now my mind is kind of blank, but he was helped me through my freshman year, and in fact all the way through school. I preached at his church.
In Ohio?
Yes.
Oh wow.
And my mind's gone blank for
Speed
names.
questions, Grandpa. Got to keep you sharp.
Yeah.
You trying to remember his name?
Frisney.
Frisney.
Yeah.
Good memory, Grandpa.
Yeah, he was, he kind of took me under his wing. I was a long way from home.
Yeah.
I had people who kind of encouraged me, but he probably encouraged me the most. He taught me Greek.
Oh, was your Greek teacher?
Yeah, and
Okay.
also a number of other classes. And then when I would try to quit, he would say, well, give it another week. And I got to be in the class, which was amazing.
Oh, wow.
But the rest of my classes just were not good my freshman year.
Yeah.
Tom Frisney was his name.
Tom Frisney.
Yeah, and there were others, of course, earlier than that. I didn't really have a lot of connection with people.
Yeah.
When I was going to school, I had people that encouraged me, like Mr. Gamble, who owned the drive-in, and Elmer Wentworth, who encouraged me along the way.
Yeah. What did he do? Who was that?
He was the manager of the drive-in.
Oh, okay.
And but most of my I was kind of a loner. With the work I did, I just didn't have, a lot of time to spend with people.
Yeah.
But it would have been Tom Frisney.
Cool. Very cool. Okay, another speed question. Which technology have you found most helpful in your life?
Computers.
Computers?
Yeah. Because it helped me work my way through college.
Yeah, big time. Did they have a computer on campus that you could use?
No.
You got your own.
No. These computers were encased in air conditioning and
Oh, you're the big ones.
yeah, these are the big ones, the
Okay.
126, and I learned it at Douglas, and then I transferred to the bank.
Yeah.
But It probably had the most impact. For example, when I left Douglas, I was making about $1.35, 40 cents an hour. And when I got to school, I was making 60 cents an hour, working minimum wage and doing every grunt type work, and not on a full-time basis.
Right.
So they would plug you in and tell you to keep looking. And so my freshman year, I worked at, I kept trying to remember if it Pogues or Shillito's. I think it was Shillito's that year. And as soon as we got to the end of the Christmas season, they laid everybody off. So I didn't have a job.
Oh. And
this is when I took a trip back home during my freshman year.
Oh, cool. Which technology do you find to be the most annoying? It can be at any time point.
Technology.
What's annoyed you the most? The new stuff. I feel bad for you guys because
I think we machine breakdown.
Machine.
Yeah. For example, I developed a habit that when it would jam, I'd kick the machine.
Grandpa.
And it was just like, I'm running behind Bob. And it'd be like having a glitch today where you're in the middle of something and you can't finish it because of that.
Yeah.
And I can still remember kicking this collator at Douglas. And it was just like, this piece of junk.
Collator.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And that's where I learned the two cliches. One of them is, what difference will it make 100 years from now? And the other one was, don't waste $1 million worth of emotion on a 10-cent irritation.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I like that.
And I would remember that, and I'd think, I'm overreacting here. But I was always a go-getter, so I worked hard, did my best, got the job done.
Yeah. Let's see. What's your earliest memory? Your earliest thing you can remember? I remember coming out of the womb.
What's that?
I said I remember coming out of the womb.
Yeah. I remember the cooking the chicken. I was about 5 years old, and maybe 6. And then also I remember whacking my Aunt Eva's husband in the head. Those are my earliest ones.
What?
Yeah.
Wow, 5 years old, huh?
Yeah.
Crazy. Did you receive an allowance as a child?
No.
No. Did you still have to do chores and work around the house?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah?
My job was to cut wood to heat the house. My brother's job was to get the kindling, and that was not fair.
Kindling?
That's like
it?
a little pile
Just
to get started.
Just some brush?
Yeah.
Who's that, Jack?
Yeah. So anyway, Dad had a mark that he put on the wall right above the wood box. Said, I want it stacked at this point. And I'd have to go out and chop it, sometimes cut down trees and saw it up. And if it was green, we'd let it cure a little bit. But he would bring in a truckload of what we call slab wood, where you had to split it and carry it in and put it in the box.
Yeah. Were you what was your ratio of spending to saving when you had your jobs? Was it, you had to pay for rent in high school.
Yeah.
So how much money do you have left over?
Not very much.
Not much.
I think it cost me $15 a week.
Man.
I just can't really remember.
Yeah.
I made I made 90 cents an hour there.
So when you did spend money on things, what type of I guess guilty pleasures did you spend on?
Well, the primary before I moved out was to buy my own clothes for school.
Oh.
So I used all of it, except once. And I kind of figured it all out, and then there was this phonograph for sale. So.
Phonograph.
Yes, and
okay.
So I bought the phonograph, and one of my favorite singers was K-Star, singing "Wheel of Fortune."
Oh.
And I brought it home, and Mom had a tizzy fit over it because she was counting on some of that money when I came home, and when I earned any, they always got some.
Yeah.
And I'd used it all. And so I said to Mom, Mom, I earned it. She said, yes. And Dad came in and said, no, he earned it. He can decide how to spend it.
Wow.
And then later, my mom said to me, I really like what you bought. And she would play records and such on it.
Yeah. So your dad, he wasn't mad at you for buying a phonograph?
No.
Good.
Because he had a belief, and his belief was if you earn it, you control it.
Yeah.
You decide what you do.
Yeah.
But remember, there's consequence. If you don't buy your clothes, you don't have your clothes.
True. You had that covered, though. You're good about that.
Yeah.
You had the necessities covered. That's good. Is there anything you regret not having asked your parents, Mom and Dad?
No, I was pretty straightforward with them.
Yeah.
I could ask them anything, and I could tell them anything.
Yeah.
I think that the early years of running with the bad group, I tried to hide that, of course.
Right.
But I would talk things over with my dad and ask him things. He was a simple man, but he was very wise. And he never hesitated. Or, for example, when he was drinking, he would say, if I ever catch you drinking this stuff, like I've been doing, he said, you're in big trouble.
Whoa.
And so I took him seriously. He never did drink.
Yeah. Huh. That's good. I know you worked a lot in high school and college, but what were your favorite things to do for fun outside of work? In high school, you had Thursdays off, right?
Oh, Tuesdays.
Tuesdays, okay.
I'd go to the movies.
In high school, what was your favorite thing?
I'd go to the movies.
Movies?
I worked in a movie house, saw almost everything, but when I had some time off,
Yeah.
I'd think, well, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And said, well, there's one I haven't seen, so I'd go to the movies.
Man. Cool.
Yeah, and then in college, money was tight. It actually, the minimum wage was less than what I made at the drive-in.
Wow.
So it was really low. But anyway, I had to do something. I just go stir crazy. So I'd never played table tennis. Didn't know how.
Yeah.
And my roommate, one of my early ones, embarrassed me in front of the whole school because I didn't know how to play, and they all laughed at me, And I kind of lost my cool.
Yeah.
I said, "Listen, buddy, I'm going to learn how to do this, and you better be prepared." And so I just started concentrating. Every spare moment, I had guys help me, and This guy's name was Virgil Ferringer. And I said, Virgil, I'm ready to play you again. He laughed. He said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm sure.
What?
And I beat him good.
Really?
Yeah. And then I began to play seriously. We had a graduate from our school. It was, I believe he was rated 138th in table tennis in America. He was that good.
Wow.
He had very bad eyesight, but he went by his hearing. And I said, can you teach me some of the things you know? He said, sure, I'll teach you. So we'd go and practice, and it's like practicing anything, you know. If you were playing basketball and you had somebody who was really good, and you'd say, well, how do you do that? And they'd say, no, watch how I move. And he taught me how to return, how to do the smash, we called it, and the backhand. He said, now I don't want you to hit any forehand, all backhand. Now I want you to hit only forehand, no backhand. And then he would start out real slow, and pretty soon he was firing it, man.
Wow.
And I go, well, that's just too hard. He said, no, it's not too hard. It's the way you play the game. So he had this paddle. I said, well, maybe if I had another paddle. He says, I have a friend that makes them. I'll have him make you one. It'll cost you this much. And so he made me a paddle.
Oh, cool.
So I still have the paddle, but the rubber's disintegrated.
You still have it here.
Yeah.
It's tucked away.
Yeah.
Cool. Fun fact, I picked up table tennis my freshman year of college. And I came back and told Grandpa about it.
Yeah.
And he told me that he did the same thing in college. And Grandpa got me my own paddle.
Yeah.
After about a year of me playing table tennis. But it's one of my favorite things too. So much fun.
Yeah.
The replayability is...
Well, they had every year they had a championship. And I didn't do well the first year or two. But I kept improving.
Yeah.
And one year I went through the whole thing and became school champion.
Whoa.
So I had a friend by the name of Larry who we used to play together a lot. And I beat him in like 10 games in a row. And he said, I got to get even. And so we started. The last time I played him, I was 120 games in the lead, and I beat him.
No.
And he never won one.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
You're terrible, Grandpa.
Yeah.
You're terrible.
And I tried to ease up on him, and then he'd beat himself.
Oh, man.
But I enjoyed table tennis. And it's a sport that it's totally different now. We had a young man he wasn't young, he was older than me, came from Japan. And the year that I think I didn't win or whatever, was one of the years. And he's very quiet-spoken and very little. He's only about 4'9", something like that, real small guy.
Yeah.
And he said, well, can anyone play? I said, oh, yeah, it's open to anyone. And he said, you mean I could play? And I said, oh, yeah. But he said, I don't have a paddle. I said, well, you can use mine. He got in there, won the championship. And I said, Hideo, where did you learn to play table tennis? Oh, he said, we play a lot of this on my island. My brother and I are doubles champions.
What?
Yeah.
That's the island of Japan?
That was Hideo Yoshi.
Hideo Yoshi, wow.
But anyway, that's what little I did. We didn't have a gym, so we couldn't work out in the gym.
So your college didn't have any sports teams?
Well, they played off campus, but I couldn't do that. I had to work.
Right, yeah. Wow. You were busy. You were always working.
Always.
Man. Do you regret that?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But in a way, no, because it's kind of a way to keep score of how you're doing.
Yeah.
But I had a hard time in the fact that I did not know how to. I did not know how to say no when it came to work.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, I was on starvation. But when I graduated the last time, I made more money than anybody in the school.
Whoa.
As jobs, because I had 3 jobs.
Yeah.
I was in charge of a floor. Tom Frisney set me up with that. And then I had a church on the weekends. And then I worked 30 hours during the week.
So that was while you were doing your undergraduate.
Yeah, and graduate work too.
Wow. They had you preaching at a church on weekends in your undergraduate?
Yeah, I started preaching 1957.
How did that work? Was it like an internship?
It's sort of like that. In those days, it was what they call part-time. So they had a lot of little churches.
Yeah.
And they just needed somebody to come up and preach on weekends. So you didn't have any other responsibility. You had no one to mentor you. So you just mentored yourself, or you sat there and talked it over with classmates.
Yeah. Wow.
And my first experience at that was that first week when I was a freshman. I went up with Charlie Richmond to have him voted on for 2 churches. One was called a halftime, which meant you preached there twice a month. And the other was a quarter time. And so he got hired at both. So he preached a quarter time, which is once a month, and the other one was twice a month.
Yeah.
One was named Hollowtown in Highland County, and the other one was South Liberty in Highland County.
Yeah. Wow.
Ohio.
So, you're a bit of your trade is, you're a storyteller. You know, you're a very good storyteller.
Yeah.
You're very good at speaking to people, public speaking. You talked about having to self-mentor yourself. Is there anybody that you gleaned from, that you really learned to speak from? In the way of telling sermons and preaching?
I think Charlie Richmond was one, and there was a lot of preachers that were really good preachers back there.
Yeah.
They held revivals. You'd go to the revival and you'd listen to them speak. Harvey Brame Jr. was one, and George Stansbury was another. These were big names back in those days.
Yeah.
All they did was revival preaching.
So you kind of learned from them.
Yeah, and you'd pay attention how they did it.
Yeah.
Now, Charlie Richmond preached everything by memory, and I said, "No, that's not for me. I need to know where I'm going."
Yeah.
Though I can do that, and I did. I can get up in this. For example, if they wanted me to preach Sunday, I could get up there and preach a sermon without any preparation.
Wow, you're that good.
Yeah, well, you've done it enough. You can get up there and
You kind of just got guidelines in your head.
Yeah.
And you talk around it, right?
Yeah.
Man, that's really
So
good.
the other thing is, I think the most important thing you learned is integrity. You have to have integrity.
Yeah.
And there's guys that didn't have it, and they fell.
Mm-hmm.
One guy came in drunk. Another guy was a homosexual. They just couldn't do it. Another guy was a homosexual.
Mm.
So the parents would send their kids to school trying to get them straightened out.
Yeah.
But just sad. I had some sad people.
So when you started preaching at your first church, did you sort of flounder at first trying to find your stride in preaching?
Somewhat, but I had already started preaching. That is, you fill in, what it's called fill in.
Right.
And Tom Frisney would ask me to preach at his church, and I did. I was also in a singing group when I didn't have a church.
Yeah.
So it was a mixed group, 2 women and 2 men, and we would travel with the president to represent the school. And I did that quite a bit all the time I was working.
Yeah.
So the weekends, I didn't really have a church to go to. I was always traveling somewhere.
Yeah. How long was it before you felt like you were, maybe after a really good Sunday, and you felt finally you were like, I'm good at this. I feel like I'm good at this.
Well, I could just tell you my first time in front of a crowd. I had decided to go to Bible college. And they were having a big youth gathering of numbers of churches here in Southern California. And they approached me and wanted me to give my testimony. And I said, no, I don't. I haven't been anywhere, and I don't know how to do that.
How old were you?
I was 18. And they kept saying, no, we want you to get up and talk. And I said, I don't know if I can do that. But I agreed. So, and I'd already preached one sermon at a local church. No, I didn't. That was afterwards. Anyway, I got up and I just told them my story, how I'd come to this point in my life. I actually got a letter, and I still have it, from a person that responded to my testimony.
When you were 18?
When I was 18, yeah.
Another student wrote you a letter?
Yeah.
Someone your
well,
age?
no, it was an older guy from First Christian in Inglewood.
Wow.
So I went off to college, and first couple of times, I'll just tell you a story about my brother Jack.
Okay.
Yeah, I had him fill in for me at Mount Carmel, which was the first church. And he was very nervous. He hadn't preached much. And so he got up and he told me how it happened. He said, I looked at my outline, and he said it took me about 4 minutes to go through the outline. And he said, and I just went blank. And he said, I just turned to the crowd and he said, well, there's probably somebody that could preach 15 minutes on this subject. Maybe somebody else could preach 30 minutes on this subject. There might even be somebody that could preach an hour on this subject. But I said, oh, no, and I'm done.
Wow.
And after I think it was about 8 minutes, he'd preached his first sermon. They just laughed. And, young preachers, they're very forgiving.
Yeah. How do you feel about preachers today? I feel like you have to be... Do you feel like they're more qualified or less qualified than in the past compared to today?
I don't know that I can judge it, but I think many of them have a better education.
Yeah.
But as communicators, I think that the best illustration is this. Whatever I picked up in Ohio showed. And when I preached my first sermon at First Christian in Inglewood, and I came down off the pulpit, a woman walked up and she said, I can always tell a graduate of Cincinnati and the way you preach today.
Wow.
My home preacher went there also. And it's there's a fire in us from back there. And so it's not just the information, but the motivation.
Yeah.
There's a couple of things I picked up from one of my professors, R.C. Foster. He said, first of all, if you're going to show somebody a house, you got to make sure that there's lots of windows and the windows are open. He said the windows are the illustrations and the house is the foundation.
Yeah.
He said the second thing is that you have to answer a question when you preach. And the question is this: so what? Now, very few preachers deal with that so what question. You either have an expository preacher like Matt is, and he has to work at getting to a end point as he preaches.
Yeah.
Then you have the ones that have very little to say, and they never get to anything but yelling at people. You can't yell at people. You can't browbeat people. You have to be willing to be open with people.
Mm-hmm.
Take the truth that you've learned. Use illustrations so they understand what you're saying. And then come to the conclusion with, of course, you would like to know, so what? So what that Elijah went to heaven? What does that got to do with me? So what Moses got in the mountain? What does that got to do with me? See, your generation is a questioning one. It's your generation that constantly says, okay, all right, I hear that. I believe that, okay. But what does that have to do with me? For example, I would preach on marriage or premarital behavior. And I'd say, why do you suppose God said, be celibate till you get married? Oh, that opens up some doors. People say, well, I don't believe that. You don't know. I don't believe that. Well, who's the authority? There are things you don't understand and implications you don't know about. So the so what is, I'll just trust God in this.
Mm-hmm.
So I remained celibate with your grandmother till we got married.
Yeah.
Not because I wanted to, but because I took God at His word.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things you always want to communicate in a sermon. And that is, what does God really have to say about that? For example, homosexuality. I've known a homosexual. I've worked with them. And I've known them as friends. Tried to help them in many ways. But I can't condone their behavior. And the reason I can't condone the behavior is not because I'm their judge. It's because God is.
Yeah.
See, that's the basis of preaching and teaching.
Yeah. Do you feel like your preaching technique changed as you matured
So,
as a communicator?
yeah.
Were there ever large swings
Yeah.
as your community changed? You know, if you switched churches or
Actually, I didn't have many churches when I finally preached out my time. I preached at Mount Carmel
mm-hmm.
for about 5 years, and then about 7 years in planning Fairfield Church. And then I was 17 years at First Christian Church here in the Valley.
Yeah.
Then I was 3.5 years at Northridge Christian Church. And then I was about 17 years at Christ Church of the Valley. So that was my extent. Though I preached at Conference on Evangelism in San Jose Christian College, and
Did you do a lot of like single church like visitor preacher sermons?
Not a lot, but I did do some. I'll give you one illustration. I was really preaching a lot at First Christian and got to know the Methodist preacher in town. He said, I'd like for you to come over and preach at my church. And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, for one thing, I said, I'm preaching twice on Sunday morning and once on Sunday night a different message. And I don't have time to prepare another one.
Yeah.
He said, no, I really want you to come and preach. I'm going to be on vacation. I said, no, I don't think you do. And he said, yeah, I do. So I said, well, okay, what time is it? He said, I looked at your schedule and I saw that you had a spot right here where you could preach. So I thought, what am I going to say? So I got up in that church. Now this is called application. I said, my great-grandfather was a lay Methodist preacher. And boy, everybody sat up straight because it was a Methodist church.
Yeah.
And I said, my father and my grandmother, not so much my grandfather, attended in the North Dakota area, the Methodist church. My mother was Lutheran, born Norwegian, and so that was her background. So when I came along, I was nothing. But I'm not going to talk about me, I'm going to talk about you. And this is what I said. I'm a firm believer in the Word of God, and I believe that the Methodist Church will never be what it once was until it gets back to being a solid Bible-teaching, Bible-believing group. And if you don't believe me, check with John Wesley, who started the Methodist Church. It's time to get back to where he started. I had people stand up and cheer.
Wow.
I got 4 families from that church.
They switched over to your church.
Yeah.
Wow. And they stayed at your congregation?
Yeah.
Man.
And that's why I didn't want to go there. I wasn't trying to proselyte anybody.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, I did a little of that, not a lot. I was too busy. Our church we had a full-time activity church that was stand up against some of the mega churches, and we were doing it with 2 of us.
Man.
And I actually worked Carl Bookout to death. He was my associate, and he worked as hard as I did and deserves a lot of credit. I was just thinking this morning about my Timothys. That Timothy is someone who follows in your steps. And one was Randy Harrison, who I just saw Sunday. Had come in with his dad having surgery. And then I thought of another guy that I got involved, and Carl had some involvement with this too. And he's now in Indiana, a preacher. And then I thought of another young man that Steve Siddle was one of our young men. He now works with youth in Texas.
Yeah.
So you have what you call mentoring a relationship.
Wow. Walk me through developing a sermon. What's the timeline look like? Did you have set days where you did certain things?
Okay, it depends on the sermon. Okay, first of all.
Okay.
If it's topical,
How do you decide?
you may be doing a group of topicals, such as the 5 things that develop for a good marriage, or 5 things to grow in the Lord, or whatever.
So that's 5 weeks?
Yeah, no, it's one sermon.
Oh, one sermon, okay.
So you go through the points. I preached one called the 4 most important truths. And sometimes I picked up the ideas, the points, elsewhere.
Yeah.
I read about it or saw it in a book or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would develop around it.
Yeah.
But I also preached expository like Matt does. I preached through the book of James, and I have 27 sermons from the book of James, which is verse by verse through the book.
I memorized James my 8th grade year.
Did you?
All of it.
Well, I'll be sure to save my sermons for you.
Greetings.
Yeah.
To the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
Dispersed across the nations.
That's wonderful.
It was,
well, I know it was a try.
It was a lot.
I had to memorize the second chapter of Acts.
Yeah.
And I memorized 14th chapter of John. And so I had a lot of memory work.
Yeah.
But the thing is, so there were times when I was almost all expository preaching. And then there was times when I would break it off. And then I would do a series. And it would be 4 things that will help this church to grow. And I would use biblical truths to put behind it.
Yeah.
A better prayer life, a outreach mentality. So you just go down, develop the ideas.
How long was each sermon?
Sometimes a little too long.
Oh.
But most of the time the preaching lasted between 25 and 30 minutes. But I have preached as long as 45.
Okay.
And I have preached as short as 20. So it all depends. If you get into the sermon, you want to make sure, I've always told the preachers this, have a clock on the wall.
Yeah.
Don't do this.
Yeah, that looks bad.
If you do this, it's like, oh, gee.
When do I get out of here?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You just broke your...
Yeah.
And so and you have to be quick on your feet. Say a bunch of kids are starting to scream and cry. And you say, don't worry about them. I started preaching with no microphones. And it's if I can't sound that baby, then I'm not doing my job.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's pretty much the way it was.
How, so it always starts with singing, right? Did you always start with
Yes.
worship at the beginning?
Yes.
And so you had a worship leader that took care of that?
No, I did that too.
You did that?
To start with, yeah.
Okay. How did that work?
Well, I just led music because I did it in revivals. I did revivals, where I would go somewhere else, and I preached a week revival, but mostly because I was musical, they wanted me to do the music.
Yeah. And Grandma played the piano.
No, this is before I met your mom.
Whoa.
Grandma, oh yeah.
What?
This is back when I was in college.
Whoa.
And so, of course, all the music was out of the hymn books. You didn't do overhead. You didn't have the overhead and any of that.
And you didn't have to pay licensing for the hymn books, nothing like that?
No, because they got licenses when they printed it.
Okay.
But if you took some song that was not there, right at the beginning they started saying you have to give credit. But that happened in the, I would say in the late 80s, somewhere in the late 80s.
So the tail end of your career then.
Yeah.
And so did you ever run into licensing issues like that? No, never.
No.
Yeah.
And they still do that today.
Yeah, Central, they license every song.
Well, they have to.
Yeah.
Because if you get caught, it could cost you $2,000.
Yeah. The Hillsong
Yeah.
Corporation, they got all those songs.
Yeah. And what you do, there's an organization you get connected with, and you turn in at the end of the year all the songs and that you used under their licenses.
Wow, you pay once at the end of the year?
Yeah, and the company you pay to pays them.
Everybody's got to eat, huh?
Yeah.
You got to eat. You can't blame them. Okay, so break down you making a sermon from scratch. Okay, topical or not.
Okay.
What's the timeline look like?
First of all, you have to start with what's called the main idea.
Okay.
What are you going to try to communicate? Now, if you're in a series, it's already decided. You say, okay, this is step 1, this is step the next sermon will be this, and the next will be that, and the next will be that. If it's a topical sermon, you just, and it's only one, you would sit down and say, okay, what are the main points that I'm going to try to address? And so you take the main points. For example, Central's doing one right now on living the life or something like that. And so each one has a subject matter concerning the life. Say, I was doing one on prayer. I could start out with analysis of the Lord's Prayer. And I would go down through it. I'd say, well, should we be preaching that everybody should recite the Lord's Prayer? And everybody go, they grew up, doing it.
Yeah.
And I say, nothing wrong with that, except it's not a substitute for the subject of which I speak. You see, Jesus didn't say, repeat this on a constant basis. He said, this is how you ought to pray. You begin with giving God glory, and then you go down through it. So that's a single sermon on prayer. Then you go to the next one, say, now, how do I develop a prayer life? How do I do that? How does that happen in my life? How can I become a person of prayer? And then you talk about discipline, and you talk about place, and you talk about content, and you talk about the end result. And the end result in prayer is not my will, but yours be done.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's how you begin. You begin with the major breakdown. Then you do a research of Scripture on top of that. Usually you start out with at least one or two verses that contribute to what you're saying.
How did you research?
Oh, you go through a concordance, or I have a pretty good memory, so I have a lot of Scripture that I can turn to in my mind.
Yeah.
And say, for example, we're talking about becoming a follower, where Jesus says, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be yours as well. And I could preach a whole sermon on that. And says, well, what does that mean, seek? And what does that mean, righteousness? And what about all these things? And then you ask yourself the question, what is my goal in life? And I would go down to conclusion, and I'd say, if your goal is just to become rich, then you're like the foolish farmer who got to the end of his life and he'd done real well financially, and he just had a bumper crop, and all of a sudden he says, what do I do now? And the underlying thing is to reach out to others.
Yeah.
But he said, no, I'm going to build a bigger barn. I'm going to fill my barn, and then I'm going to kick back and take it easy. And Jesus said of him, you're a fool. You're a fool. Today your soul is required of you. And so you just go along those lines. Sometimes you are teaching through a book like Ecclesiastes or Proverbs in the Old Testament, or the life of Jesus in the Gospel of John.
How far in advance did you know what you were going to preach on a given Sunday?
Well, one of the problems with me is I'm a last minute guy.
Okay.
And sometimes I would have it laid out where I'd have a month ahead or 2 months ahead. Sometimes it was Sunday by Sunday.
Just,
Yeah, and I'd sit down and say, I need to speak on this subject. And then I would, usually at least 30 days.
Wow. Usually a whole month in advance.
Yeah, and you would keep notes and ideas and illustrations.
Yeah.
And some of the sermons were duds. They didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And some of the duds were sermons. They did go somewhere.
How many sermons do you think you preached?
Oh,
Give me a ballpark. How many years you've been doing it? 52 weeks in a year, right?
well, at First Christian, I was preaching 3 times Sunday morning and 1 time on Sunday night.
Whoa.
So that was 4 times a Sunday. Not counting teaching. I was teaching a class on Sunday night as well. And so multiply that out by a year. Not all of the years that I preach 3 times on Sunday morning. I preached sometimes twice because we didn't do 3. And most of the time, the latter part of my ministry, I preached twice on a Sunday morning, and then on Sunday night, a completely different message.
Huh.
So I had to prepare 2.
Wow. Was that, I sort of liken that to like assignments and papers and stuff in college, you know, that's sort of like the anxiety that gives me when I think about preaching and preparing sermons and stuff. Is that something you enjoyed, or was it always kind of looming and stressing you out?
A little of both.
A little of both.
Yeah, there were times I enjoyed the preaching, but the preparation at times became anxiety. I'd run out of time. The tempting thing is to not preserve time for preparation.
Right.
And so one of the things that I'm a last minute kind of guy, and I worked a lot, so I learned how to move on my feet.
Right. Yeah. I consider myself a last minute guy too.
Yeah.
A lot of my big stuff in college, it was kind of like I would work on it beforehand, a couple weeks, but it would usually always come to the night before or the day before that, you know.
Well, let me give you one example. I did my preparation for my master's, but I didn't have time to do my research and to get ready to write my thesis. After 5 years, they would drop the master's degree. So you had 5 years to get it done. Well, I was just starting a new church, and I was working like crazy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I was in my last year, and I had done very little. And I didn't ask anybody to give me time off or anything. I had a 3-week vacation. So I told Betty, I said, she was pregnant with Michael, and of course she had Regina. And I said, and if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have been able to do it. But I said, I'm going to take this 3 weeks and do the research. And every weekend I'm going to come up to the farm with what I've written by hand and give to you to put in rough draft. And she said, okay. She was a very good typist, by the way. And so that's what we did. And I wrote, each week I wrote pretty much a chapter. And at the end, she'd type it up and I'd take it to Lewis Foster, who is a graduate of Harvard. And I was like, is he going to throw it all out? Well, you know. And he just kept reading, and he said, you say an awful lot in a short length of time. I said, yeah. I said, I'm trying to be accurate. And then I was like in this 3rd chapter of it, and I have a copy of it here. You can read sometime. But anyway, he really got into it because his field was New Testament age. And I wrote the confrontation between paganism and Christianity in the 1st century. And he just read it, and I thought, he's not saying anything. And he went back and read it again and still didn't say anything. And I thought, I'm going to be in trouble. And he looked at me and he said, I'm just really impressed with this information. would you mind if I quoted you in chapel Sunday out of this thesis?
Wow.
I said, I'd be honored. And he did. And that year when I graduated, they considered it the best thesis of the year. At least that's what they said.
Good job, Grandpa.
Yeah.
Well done.
Now in my doctorate, same thing, same situation.
Wow.
Only difference is I was trying to knock it out on my days off.
Yeah.
I only had one day off a week. And so I worked all the rest of the time. And sometimes I would take off one extra day. And one of the elders came to me and said, you're not going to make it, not like this. So we're going to give you 30 days off. And you go and concentrate and get this thing done. So that's what they did.
Wow.
And so I had that time to do the research. Same thing, Betty would write it up. I would take it to the professor at the school. And that's how I wrote my second writing, which is a dissertation called The Importance of the Lord's Supper.
Wow. You took it to the same Harvard professor?
No, this was
Or was your...
a different school.
Okay, got it. It was your doctorate. Wow.
So anyway,
so you were
that's
good under pressure.
I did well under pressure. I didn't know any other way to do it. I was always an under pressure guy.
Yeah.
And I was able to do pretty good work.
Some of my best stuff has been under pressure.
Mine too.
Some of my best.
I was we were doing finals, and I mean I was at my limits, and Jack Cottrell and I were graduates, and he's PhD from Princeton. But anyway, so he comes to me and he's wide-eyed like this. Jack, what's the matter? He said, well, you know my GPA is so and so and so and so, and he's like 3.98, you know. He said, I don't know anything about music, and I don't know how to study for this music final. Would you help me? I said, well, I got the same class. I got to study anyway. So let's do it. So we sat down, went through it. I said, this stuff's like Greek to you. I mean, it's mathematical, Jack.
Was it music theory?
Yeah, it had a lot of theory in it. And so he said, I don't understand this. I said, no, think of it like math. Don't think of it like music. Just think of it progression, math progression.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain progression you have to know. If you have to know a certain chord, you have to know how that fits. And so if he asks for a chord, you have to be able to tell him what musical notes do you play to play a C chord. He may only ask for one. So we come in at the test, and Jack is a nervous wreck. And I'm not much better because I'm taking, too much work. And I said, Jack, how do you think you did? I just wrote down everything you told me. I said, well, I did too, so we'll see. So the next time the class met, Ewing Berry, who had always been criticized because he was a graduate of Juilliard and he was a music major, and he tried to keep things simple, but he never did. It was always very complicated. He said, I'd like Ronald to stand, please. I thought, oh, what does this mean? Jack Cottrell, stand, please. And a young gal, Rosalind Oberst, and Rosalind Oberst, stand, please. Now, class, I want you to look at these three. They all got 100% on the final.
Whoa.
He said, now I know there's a lot of complaining going on, and I could just see daggers. These people, you dirty rats. And he said, but I just want you to know that if you apply yourself, you can do a good job.
Wow.
And so, that was one time. Another time was history was my thing, and Jack and I studied history together. And I had I can't remember now. I still have the test. I think I had 13 errors on 280 questions.
Wow.
And Jack had 12 or 14, so I beat him. He never forgot that. We both got A's.
Wow.
I'm capable of doing A work in anything I apply myself.
Yeah.
But being overextended, I didn't do well in high school. I was like a 3.0.
Right.
You know, I could have been a 4.0. I just wasn't.
So I feel like you've taken really well to retirement. Was it easier for you to disconnect from that constant deadline versus someone like my dad? You know, like I feel like when he retires, he'll never be able to stop. He's gonna have to find something to do.
Yeah.
But
well,
how did you take to your retirement?
At first, it was very hard. You get when you're a man, especially, you have a tendency to identify yourself with what you do. And so if somebody says, "Who are you?" I'm Pastor so-and-so. All of a sudden, I'm not.
Right.
So that's the first thing. They had a retirement party for us and a lot of people there. And that was very nice. And when I got my PhD, they gave us a trip to Holy Land as a gift from the church.
Yeah.
But at first, it was just a relief. For one thing, I didn't have to worry about finances. We had put aside as much as possible with Betty's income, and it has paid off.
Yeah.
So we invested with Mike and done well.
Yeah.
So we don't have to worry about the finances at this point.
Yeah, that's good.
Though I still have a little anxiety that from my very beginning, because we grew up very poor.
Yeah.
And we never knew from week to week whether we'd have enough. So sometimes we had plenty, and sometimes we didn't have any.
Well,
We'd have to go without.
You've done well for yourself, Grandpa.
Well, I've worked at it. God has provided, and I give Him the glory.
Yeah.
That's one thing I can say. The decisions that I made was with prayer, first of all, and secondly with faith. I believed what God said, and I said, when I went to Ohio, I quit my job at Douglas, and with a promise of a job, which turned out to be a disappointment.
Mm.
And that, I don't know if I mentioned it, but at the middle of the freshman year, I traveled with Jack Martin and then the guy who was going to California. And it cost, I think I mentioned it cost $25 round trip. And my family took up an offering to help me with school. And that's kind of the way my life has been.
Yeah.
Last moment, God provides.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so the most important thing I could tell you, Christian, is the more you trust God, the more you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And the less you trust Him, the more you're going to hurt.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears here on the questions. That was pretty good. Same gear actually. Favorite book of the Bible?
Book of Hebrews.
You like Hebrews? For what reason? Or reasons?
It ties the Old and New Testament together, and it helped me to make sense of how the Old Testament and the New Testament were so true. There's an old statement that goes something like this. The Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. And so it's hard to understand Hebrews. I took a class in Hebrew, the book.
Yeah.
But once you finally get a grip on it, you deal with all kinds of issues. For example, John talks about Jesus being God. But you might miss the first chapter of Hebrews that says that God told all the angels to worship him. And I presented that to Jehovah's Witnesses, and they get really worked up. I said, who should you worship? Jehovah? Oh yes. Only Jehovah? Yes. Only Jehovah. Okay, explain this to me. Jehovah, God, told the angels to worship Jesus. That means Jesus is God. Total silence.
Yeah.
We'll get back to you. And I never see him again.
Because they...
And we did this at school. We actually had Mormons come in and we debated them.
As like a scheduled thing?
No.
They just came in?
They just came thinking they were going to get us.
Really?
Yeah.
The nearby Mormon college?
Yeah.
They just came in for some mock trial debates?
Yeah, they came in. We also had debated a Catholic priest from Seton High School.
Wow.
And I was the history expert. Jack was the theology. And Jim Smith was the rabid dog. And so we took this guy on. He didn't know what hit him. We were all really up on everything.
Yeah. Man, that's really good. Back to your preaching. What was your favorite sermon, or maybe one that you were most proud of?
The Four Greatest Truths.
You like that one?
Yeah, and it was not original points, but it was a subject matter. And I preached it in Mexico. And it probably wouldn't have been my favorite, but I was trying to find a sermon that would relate to a primitive group of people, many of them uneducated. And I don't remember the points right now, but that one of them was that Jesus is the Son of God, and these different things.
Yeah. And
so I finished. I had a translator, and I would preach at a certain point and stop. Gil Contreras was my translator. He would translate. He always said more than I said. And I always accused him of adding a little extra.
Really?
But anyway, he's gone to be with the Lord, a great man.
Oh, man.
And so I went through the first point, and second point, and third point. I didn't want to make it real long, and so I think I preached 20 minutes or something like that, maybe 25. And I sat down. And these were just really poor people. And one of the men got up. He was an elder, and it had been raining, and he had his pants leg rolled up, and he didn't have shoes on. And I thought, that's cool, no big deal. So he gets up, and he starts. And he goes on and on and on, about 3 times the time I spent preaching. And we had another translator with me who came from the church. She was from Guatemala, and she had come down to represent the missions committee. And Rita Shevlin was her name. So anyway, I bumped her and I said, what's he saying? She said, shh. Okay. I waited for a while and I said, well, what is he saying? Shh. And finally he ended. And I'm like, what in the world did he have to say? So I finally said, well, what did he say? She said, well, in Spanish, he said, for those 4 truths, I'm willing to die.
Whoa.
And about 3 years later, they killed him
Man, that's sad.
for his faith. You might say that was one of my favorites. I went back to Northridge and preached it. And I just said, I hope you take this to heart. That when a person is willing to die for truth, then that shows where his faith really is. Anyway.
I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Thanks, Grandpa.